President Trump calls the Democratic rebuttal to the Nunes memo a nothing, and he says its writer, Congressman Adam Schiff, is a, quote, bad guy.
And it's now the Democrats' turn to respond to GOP claims of a biased Russian investigation. They say the president is already trying to deflect attention from that. He called into Fox News after that memo was released. Take a listen.
He calls up reporters, and then all of a sudden they have news, and you're not supposed to do that. It's probably illegal to do it. You know, he'll have a committee meeting, and he'll leak all sorts of information. You know, he's a bad guy. But it's certainly, the memo was a nothing. It confirmed, basically, if you look at it, it confirmed. I watched Miss Hurge, who's fantastic, on your show just before. And I will tell you, that was really just a confirmation of, if you call it the Republican memo or the Nunes memo, it's referred to as a lot of things, but that was nothing.
Now, the Republican memo accused the FBI of surveillance abuses and political bias in the Russia investigation. The Democratic memo takes on those claims and attempts to knock them down point by point.
The 10-page memo disputes a central claim from Republicans that the controversial dossier written by ex-British intelligence agent Christopher Steele was at the heart of the surveillance warrant used on former Trump campaign foreign policy advisor Carter Page.
This investigation did not start because of the Steele dossier. It started because of George Papadopoulos. It started much earlier than any surveillance on Carter Page, and that the surveillance of Carter Page was warranted because of the voluminous amount of information that was out there that was concerning about his contacts with the Russians.
The memo, written by Representative Adam Schiff, argues the dossier played a narrow role, and the DOJ provided the court with information from multiple sources about Page's activities with Russians.
And Carter Page, I don't know of anyone who takes him seriously as a Russian agent, including the Russians or the FBI, because he had worked with the FBI against the Russians back in 2013, and he never played any real role in the Trump campaign.
Democrats also pushed back against charges that the FBI misled the court about Steele's motivations and financial backing from the DNC, writing that the court was informed the dossier's funders were politically motivated and wanted to discredit Trump's campaign.
We wanted it out. We want it out because we think it is clear evidence that the Democrats are not only trying to cover this up, but they're also colluding with parts of the government to help cover this up. But what you're not going to see is anything that actually rejects what was in our memo.
The Schiff memo also suggests that in addition to the investigation into Carter Page, the FBI opened several sub-inquiries into multiple Trump campaign associates by September of 2016.
All right, let's talk about what we've discovered in this Democratic rebuttal. Joining us now, CNN reporter Kara Scannell, National Security Attorney Mark Zaid, and CNN political analyst Julian Zeller. So good morning to everyone.
Good morning.
Kara, let me start with you. The president says it's a confirmation of the Republican memo. You heard there from Chairman Nunes, no actual rejections of his memo. Is he right?
Well, I think that, depending on which side you want to believe, you can read it either way. But the Democratic memo does knock down some of the notions that the Republican memo put forward, which you just heard Christie report, the notion that it was politically motivated and that wasn't disclosed. It was disclosed in the application to the court, according to the Democrats, that this was the source of this information was looking to discredit the Trump campaign. The other notion that the memo was based, that the FISA warrant was based entirely on the dossier was also knocked down because we know that the FBI had interviewed Carter Page in March of 2016. That's several months before they sought this application in October of 2016.
Yeah. And
it was the same month that Carter Page joined the Trump campaign.
Mark, let's go through that point specifically of disclosure of political elements here. The GOP memo claimed, and let's put it up on the screen, that neither the initial application in October 2016 nor any of the renewals disclose or reference the role of the DNC Clinton campaign or any party campaign in funding Steele's efforts. This from the Democratic rebuttal. The FBI speculates that the identified U.S. person was likely looking for information that could be used to discredit candidate one's campaign. Actually, they say that that was in the application for the warrant. So this goes to the central narrative of what the Republicans claimed.
No, absolutely. And in fact, the one thing that is so new in this memo is that we have language from the FISA application actually quoted, because quite frankly, there's not much in this 10-page document that's new between leaks and legitimate appearances by House members of the House Select Committee on Intelligence after the Nunes memo came out. All of this really had been said, and we've been talking about it for almost the last month. But that point was really important. Okay, it doesn't say DNC. Okay, it doesn't say the Clinton campaign. But it says that this memo had some motivations to discredit the Trump campaign. And it doesn't really make a difference from a bias standpoint, whether that was GOP objections to the Trump campaign, of which there was numerous. And, let's not forget, the original folks that were hiring Steele to do his work and the organization that hired him were actually from anti-Trump GOP members.
Julian, let's also put this into the context. The president tweeted out last night that the memo shows that there was no, and let's put this up, where the memo did not name Hillary Clinton, the memo did not name the DNC, but this comes after a year of Republicans' outrage about unmasking in this process.
Right, so there's a hypocritical claim by the Republicans about why the specific names weren't mentioned, but it's pretty clear from the language that the fact that this came from a political operation was stated. And it didn't matter because there was so much other evidence that the courts and the investigators were looking at. This was one piece of the puzzle. So if you look at this memo and you agree with the memo, it means that the Republicans on this committee skewed the information, misled the public, and their memo, they were really trying to slant all the evidence to make a case that would discredit this.
Kara, the House Intelligence Committee is still investigating Russia and potential involvement in with the Trump campaign, meddling in the election. What does this process now that it's devolved into these dueling memos and rebuttals, what does it mean for the confidence in that finding? Can they even reach a consensus?
Well, both parties in this committee have been really disjointed for much of this investigation. So you've got the Democrats wanting to pursue various threads, including seeking financial records and going down into the weeds on that, and the Republicans will not grant them subpoena power to do that. So they're a fractured group, and I think as it continues, it's not going to get any better. We're going to still see both sides try to move forward with their investigation. The Republicans are in control, so they'll determine what interviews go forward in the future. But I do think we're going to see two different reports at the end of the day, one from the majority and one from the minority.
Julian, the president said that the Nunes memo vindicated him as it relates to Bob Mueller's Russia investigation, special counsel. Several congressional Republicans came out and said this has nothing to do with that. The Nunes memo really has nothing to do with that. Does this rebuttal have any impact or any connection at all to that either?
No, I don't think it will, only in that we now live in two worlds and two parties are seeing the same investigation through a very different lens. It is important and relevant that the Democratic memo shows that the reasons for the investigation were legitimate. They were not political. That said, it doesn't really matter given how partisan this has become. And I think in the end, the president could have tweeted that tweet before he saw the memo, and many of his supporters would believe it. And that's a problem for a real investigation to happen.
Mark, give us the big picture here. The precedent. We are now reading portions of warrant application through the FISA court. We now have this precedent of the Republicans will release their view, their politically partisan view of something. The Democrats will release their view. What does this mean for the future of this process?
That's a great question. I love reading information about the FISA court. This is a secretive court, the FISC, that we don't get to see. And every time one of these memos comes out and information gets declassified, we use it in numerous lawsuits, particularly under the Freedom of Information Act, to try and get access to greater information. That said, this process has destroyed what was usually a bipartisan effort by the House Select Committee on Oversight of Intelligence to look into executive branch issues for the last 40 years. It has destroyed what was this past use. And right now, and what Julian was saying, the partisanship is at such a high level. The politicization of intelligence is so rampant that I have a great fear for the institutional aspects of this system that's being destroyed, the very fabric being destroyed as we see both sides duel with national security information that, frankly, we're never supposed to see.
Chairman Nunes was on stage at the time when this was released yesterday, and he said that Democrats were trying to cover this up. There was collusion in trying to prevent certain things from being released. Is there any clarity in what he was talking about specifically? And can you speak to what he also claimed was the intentional 2-week delay on the part of Democrats on releasing this, the redacted version?
Well, there was no, hard to understand what he means by obstruction or what they're alleging by the Democrats. The process here was that the White House was given the Democratic memo just as it was given the Republican memo. The White House sent it back saying that there were concerns about not releasing it. And of course, they did not have those concerns on the Republican memo. So over the past 2 weeks, they've been dealing with the FBI, which has opposed the release of either memo, was working to redact certain portions of this Schiff memo in order to not reveal too many details about sources and methods. So that's really why there was this delay. And it was the White House that it then went back to the White House, and it was the White House that said now it was ready and fine to be released, and they released it on a Saturday.